Thank you for the opportunity to be part of a document which summarizes not only the fundamental contradictions of our epoch, but mainly the solutions towards pluripolarity and socialism. This manifest not only demonstrates the defense of socialist experience, but also shows to the old world that we don't deny the history of the international communist movement. On the contrary, we are proud of our history. For example, the Soviet Union was responsible for the first time in history for giving women equality before the law. Another example, so we defeated the Nazis in Second World War. We launched the first animal, the dog named Laika, the first man and woman into space. The Chinese Revolution was the greatest social revolution of all times. Socialism last century was the main force supporting the colonization movement in Asia and Africa, and a fundamental inspiration to the movements for the emancipation of women and blacks. And today, nowadays, socialism is responsible for ending the extreme poverty in a country of 1.3 billion people. I dare say that the finish of extreme poverty in China was the greatest achievement in the human history. I repeat, we are not ashamed of our history. However, socialism is still taking its first step in history. The world is still predominantly capitalist, and capitalism, since the beginning of the last century, already showed signs of irrationality and being transformed into a systemic trend. The rise of imperialism and the two world wars were the first empirical evidence of the degradation of the world under the dominance of monopoly capital. The protracted war against socialism and all the violence unleashed by imperialism against peoples struggling against the colonialism were open wounds against humanity that we all have an obligation to demonstrate. North American imperialism is the greatest threat to the humanity existence. This manifesto came at a very opportunity and special time in history. A new wave of imperialist violence has been unleashed since the beginning of the last decade. Imperialists sponsored massacres in Syria and Libya, hybrid wars intended to disintegrate societies, and the use and abuse of economic pressure on countries like Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, and People's Korea have been intensified. The fingerprints of imperialism are present in the present barbaric war waged by Saudi Arabia against the Yemeni people and the growing colonization of Palestine by the fascist government of Israel. With deep emotion, I speak about my country, Brazil. My country has been under imperialist intervention since the 2016 coup. Brazilian society is completely disjointed and devoid of its own will. Jair Bolsonaro's pro-imperialist government is a deep wound in the history of my country. But I have deep hope in the ability of the Brazilian people to understand that. The unity of progressive forces in Brazil will be the key to defeating Bolsonaro and his genocidal policy that has already killed more than 500 people, Brazilians, by COVID-19. Finally, I will mention the current New World War conducted by the US government against the People's Republic of China. Large sectors of the Western academic leftists have been confused by harboring false theses of true imperialism, when in fact, the great aim of imperialism is to reduce China to a subordinate condition. The new Cold War is another colonial war of a new kind aimed at subjugating China and the Chinese people to destroy socialism as a human experience. In this regard, We must pay attention to what's likely to happen in coming years, both in South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait. On the other hand, in the field of ideas, I think that the Chinese development process and the movement generated from this historical process constitutes the greatest theoretical challenge of our time. I think that new historical forms of production, ownership, and planning have emerged in the country over the last 40 years. China challenges us to think socialism like a concept that manifests itself in the real movement. New economic irregularities emerge in China, placing the frontier of the human science on another level. My current research agenda that I developed at State University of Rio de Janeiro is aimed to understanding the new historical forms of socialism that have emerged in China over the last 4 years. On this issue, I will be releasing 2 books in the coming months, one in Brazil and one in English by Routledge Publishing. Indeed, the defense of the Chinese model experience is not a case of uncritical adherence to Chinese model. It's about defending the most successful experience of national and social emancipation in history since the Paris Commune and the Soviet experience. I said earlier that capitalism and imperialism are 2 sides of the same coin, whose irrationality is a systemic feature. Wars, financial crisis, and the advance and the far right around the world are proof of the rottenness of capitalism. On the other hand, China can be treated as an expression of the civilizational superiority that socialism offers the peoples of the world. Certainly, socialist China is the last frontier between reason and barbarism that marks the present historical epoch. I would like to conclude my presentation demonstrating my belief in capacity of the peoples of the world in fight and victory against the global military dictatorship represented by US imperialism. I greet all those present with all my affection. A warm hug for all. We are one. Thank you too much.